Some moments stay with you forever, like the instant a broken woman reaches for a stranger just to feel
hug me
safe
for a
for a
second.
single breath. She didn't want saving. She just wanted the pain to stop. But the man who held her that night would become the one thing her
You are not
past
walking
could no
away
longer
this time.
silence.
Daniel,
And it
please
all
just
started
leave me
with a
alone.
hug
Please just
she
leave me
never
alone.
expected
Hey,
to
that's
ask
enough.
for.
Back off.
Let me take you to that moment and everything that followed. The echo of Daniel's laughter reached her before she even saw him sharp enough to make her chest tighten the way it used
It's all
to years
connected.
ago.
The dates
Mara
in these
Collins
papers
stood near
match
the
what we
center
found
of
on the
Hartford's
drive.
Union Station.
Look closer
the
at this
evening
section
rush
right here.
swirling around her like a restless tide.
Are you sure you're
Commuters brushed
okay?
past
What's the
her
matter?
coat
Can't handle the
sleeves,
tension.
their hurried footsteps clattering
Honey,
against
let's
the
just
marble
go.
floor, each sound tightening the knot already forming in her stomach.
Sao anh
She
có thể
shifted
làm vậy
her
với
weight,
tôi?
gripping the strap of
Mọi
her
chuyện kết
canvas
thúc rồi.
work bag as
Đi
if
đi.
it could anchor her in place. The 6:10 train home was still 12 minutes out. She had checked twice. She had wanted nothing more than to slip into her seat, lean her head against the cold window, and let the rhythm of the tracks calm the frayed edges of her mind. But one familiar sound, one she had prayed never to hear again, was enough to make the entire station tilt. She didn't turn at first. She didn't need to. That laugh had once been warm, magnetic. Later, it had become a weapon.
Just
Tonight,
hug me for a
it cut
second.
through the noise with the accuracy of someone who still knew where her soft places were. When she finally looked up, he was already watching her. Daniel walked with that same loose confidence he had worn, like a tailored suit, shoulders relaxed, smile just sharp enough to make it clear he enjoyed being seen.
You are not walking away
His
this
new
time.
girlfriend, a
Daniel,
tall
please
brunette
just leave me
in a
alone.
cream
Please just
coat,
leave me alone.
walked
Hey,
beside
that's
her.
enough. Back off.
They were only 30 feet away. But to Mara, it felt like 10 years collapsing into a single breath. She considered turning, pretending she hadn't heard, but her hesitation was all the time he needed. "Well," Daniel said, voice raised just enough to carry, "if it isn't Mara." "Still taking the commuter line, huh?" She tried to steady her breath. "Hi, Daniel." He stopped in front of her, his smile stretching wider as his gaze slid down her coat, her scuffed boots, her weathered bag. "Same job at the literacy center?" "Yes," she said, wishing her voice didn't sound so small. "Still living in that tiny rental with the squeaky radiator?" Her cheeks heated. People slowed, sensing tension, the way crowds do. Strangers tried not to stare, and stared anyway. Daniel's girlfriend gave a sympathetic little pout. "She's adorable," she murmured, the way someone might speak about a lost pet. Mara swallowed hard. She had spent years learning to hold herself steady, to quiet the self-doubt he had fed. But now, in the middle of a public place, the old shame rose like a tide she couldn't outrun. Daniel's tone
It's all
shifted to
connected.
something colder.
The dates in these
almost
papers
bored.
match what we found on the drive.
"You always said humility
Look
was
closer
a
at this
virtue.
section right here.
But if humility is your brand, well, congrats. You're nailing it." Her pulse hammered in her ears. She felt herself shrinking, that familiar collapse. The version of her he had sculpted was creeping back, timid, apologetic, grateful for crumbs. She tried to draw in a breath, but the air felt thin. "Daniel," she said quietly, "please don't." "Don't what?" he asked with mock innocence. "Don't mention reality? Someone should. You always lived small, Mara. Safe. Invisible. Invisible."
Are you sure
The
you're
word
okay?
stung.
What's the matter? Can't handle
It
the
hit
tension.
the part of her that still believed she was
Honey, let's
easier
just
to
go.
ignore than to love. Her vision blurred at the edges. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears she swore she wouldn't let him see. The crowd around them felt too close. The lights too bright, her skin too thin. She took one step back, and that was when she saw him. A man sat alone on a long wooden bench across the concourse, angled slightly toward the tracks. He looked absorbed in something on his phone, unaware of the unfolding scene. His dark coat was neatly fitted, his shoulders broad beneath the wool. Soft overhead lights reflected in the silver threads at his temples.
Sao anh có thể làm vậy
There
với
was a
tôi?
stillness about him
Mọi chuyện
that
kết thúc rồi.
contrasted sharply
Đi đi.
with the frantic movement around them, as if noise knew better than to disturb him. Mara didn't know why her gaze locked on his. Maybe because he looked like someone who wouldn't laugh at her. Maybe because she was drowning and he seemed like solid ground. Her breath broke. Daniel's voice cut through again. "See? You're doing it. Shrinking. You never changed. Her throat constricted. Something inside her cracked, something she had held together for too long. Before she could reconsider, she moved. 1 step. 2. Her feet carried her toward the man on the bench before the rational part of her could protest. Her heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint. She reached him and saw him glance up, eyes a striking gray that held quiet, steady intelligence. She leaned down, voice barely a breath. I'm sorry. I don't know you. But please just hug me for a second. For a moment, she waited for confusion. Instead, he stood. He rose with a calmness that made her knees weaken, and without a single question, he placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle, not possessive. The warmth of his palm grounded her instantly. She felt the tremor in her breath ease. Then, in a tone low and steady enough to quiet the entire space, he said, There you are. I was starting to worry. His arm slipped lightly around her back. She stiffened, overwhelmed, not by fear, but by the unfamiliar sensation of being shielded rather than scrutinized. Daniel's voice faltered behind her. Wait. Who? The stranger's hold remained soft but unwavering. He met Daniel's stare with a calm Mara didn't understand. A calm that said he wasn't intimidated. A calm that said he understood exactly what was happening and chose to stand beside her anyway. For the first time that night, Daniel looked uncertain. Mara didn't exhale. Not fully. She couldn't. She could only stand there, heart
You are not
pounding,
walking away this
pressed
time.
into the safety of
Daniel,
a stranger
please just
who
leave me
acted
alone.
like he
Please
had
just
always
leave me
known
alone.
her.
Hey, that's
And
enough.
as the
Back
station
off!
noise swelled around them again, one question hollowed itself into her bones. Why had he responded with such certainty as if he had been waiting for her? Evan's hand on her back felt steady, too steady for a man who should have been confused. Mara sensed it in the way his fingers rested lightly, as if gauging her trembling without drawing attention to it. The warmth of his touch cut through the cold knot in her stomach, but her breath still came shallow, uneven. She didn't dare turn toward Daniel, afraid the sight of his smirk would shatter what little composure she had left. Evan angled himself slightly in front of her, his voice calm when he spoke. Traffic kept me longer than I expected. I should have been here sooner. There was no strain, no question, no awkwardness in his tone. He sounded like a man stating a simple truth, one she hadn't earned, but one he offered without hesitation. Mara stood frozen, trying to match her breath to the slow rise and fall of his shoulder near her cheek. Daniel blinked at them, thrown off balance. You're together? He laughed, but the sound wavered. Since when? Evan didn't lift his arm fully around her, only kept his hands steady at her back, offering support without claiming anything more. The girlfriend beside Daniel shifted uncomfortably and glanced at Mara as if reassessing her entirely. Mara stared at the floor tiles, wishing they would open and swallow her. The station lights felt harsher now, revealing every line of tension in her face. Daniel scoffed. Right. You expect me to believe. Evan finally looked at him. Mara couldn't see his full expression from her angle, but she saw Daniel's reaction. It was subtle. A faint tightening around his jaw. A quick flicker of uncertainty. Daniel had always spoken as if he held the higher ground. As if everyone else should adjust themselves to his perspective. But whatever he saw in Evan's face, calm confidence, quiet authority, made him hesitate. It's not really your concern, Evan said. His voice wasn't raised, but something about
It's
its
all connected.
steadiness felt
The
immovable,
dates in these papers
like
match
a door
what we found on the
closing
drive.
gently but firmly.
Look closer at this
Daniel
section
tried
right
to
here.
regain footing. Mara doesn't just pick up strangers. Not her style. Mara flinched at how casually he laid claim to her history, as if he still dictated the truths of her life. Evan's hand shifted slightly, a quiet reassurance she didn't understand but desperately needed. Mara felt her throat tighten. The words were simple. But coming from a stranger, someone who owed her nothing, they lit something small and warm in her chest. Daniel bristled. And who are you supposed to be? Evan. He said it plainly, without embellishment. No last name, no explanation. Just Evan, as if that was enough. The girlfriend touched Daniel's sleeve. But Daniel wasn't done. His gaze snapped back to Mara, searching her face for cracks. He wanted her to break, wanted confirmation that she was still the woman he'd molded, someone who folded under pressure. Mara, you're really going to pretend?
Are you sure
I'm not
you're
pretending,
okay?
What's the matter? Can't handle the
she
tension.
whispered, surprised by the truth
Honey,
in her
let's
own
just go.
voice. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she clung to the lifeline being offered. Daniel laughed again, louder than necessary. Good luck with whatever this is. He turned, muttering to his girlfriend as they walked away. His tone pitched with frustration. Mara recognized all too well the sound of a man losing control of a story he thought he owned. When the crowd swallowed them, the space around Mara felt strangely quiet, though the station remained loud as ever. Only then did she realize she'd been holding her breath. She stepped slightly away from Evan, her knees unsteady. I'm sorry, she said, voice catching. I shouldn't have. I didn't know what else to do. Evan lowered his hand, giving her space without stepping back entirely. You don't need to apologize. I do. Her fingers tightened around her canvas bag. I shouldn't have pulled you into that. I shouldn't have pulled you into that. You didn't pull me into anything. He looked at her with a level and steady expression. Up close,
Sao anh có thể làm vậy
there
với
was
tôi?
something thoughtful in his
Mọi
gray
chuyện kết thúc
eyes,
rồi.
not pity.
Đi đi.
Not the startled confusion she would have expected, but something much softer. He was being cruel. Sometimes all it takes to stop a person like that is someone interrupting the moment. Mara swallowed, unsure what to do with the kindness in his voice. Still, I put you in an awkward position. It wasn't awkward, he said. And you looked like you needed someone. Those words undid her far more than Daniel's insults. She felt heat behind her eyes again and blinked fast, refusing to let tears slip in front of this man who had already done more for her in 3 minutes than anyone had in years. She drew in a shaky breath. You don't owe me anything. That's all. His simplicity left her momentarily speechless. He glanced toward the tracks. Your train? She checked the monitor through blurry vision. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. He nodded. Do you want me to wait with you? Just until you're comfortable again. The offer was gentle. No pressure, no implication. Just a human standing beside another human in a moment of collapse. Maybe just a minute, she said quietly. They walked to the edge of the platform. Evan kept a respectful distance, enough to show he wasn't assuming anything, but near enough that the lingering tremble in her body eased. The overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows along the concrete. She inhaled slowly, trying to steady the rising tide of disbelief. This man. She looked at his profile, calm lines, silver at the temples. Eyes that held more understanding than she could explain. Why did you help me? She finally asked. He turned toward her, expression unreadable. Because you needed it. The simplicity of that answer felt almost impossible. Her train rumbled in from a distance, its headlights cutting through the dim station air. Mara watched it approach, but her mind stayed tangled in the strange, gentle certainty of the man beside her. What kind of man stepped in like that with nothing to gain? When the crowd thinned, the trembling in Mara's hands didn't. The platform carried the echo of the departing train, leaving behind only the low hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of metal and cold air. She clutched her bag against her chest, as if the weight of it could anchor her back into herself. Evan stood a few feet away, giving her space but not stepping far enough to make her feel abandoned. You're sure you're all right? He asked. His voice was steady, but quiet enough that she sensed he was trying not to overwhelm her. Mara nodded too quickly, then stopped, realizing how unconvincing the gesture must have looked. I'm sorry, she said, hearing how shaky her words were. I shouldn't have dragged you into that. You didn't need to step in. He shook his head. You didn't drag me anywhere. She looked down, noticing how her fingers still quivered. She curled them into fists, ashamed of how visible her weakness felt. I must have looked pathetic. You didn't, he said gently. The soft firmness in his tone made her throat tighten. Kindness had always caught her off guard, real kindness, the kind not dripping with expectation or wrapped in judgment. Daniel's voice had shaped so much of her past that even the smallest gesture of care confused her. Evan took a slow breath, his hands resting lightly in the pockets of his dark coat. He seemed comfortable with silence, as if he understood that words were heavy things, not to be thrown around carelessly. The lights flickered again, casting his face in alternating warmth and shadow. The image struck her, this quiet man standing in a half-empty station with her, offering nothing but calm presence. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. He did. The simple truth of it hit her harder than she expected. She swallowed, the sting rising behind her eyes again. "I used to think, if I just handled things better, he wouldn't get under my skin." Her voice was small, more vulnerable than she intended. "People who want to make you feel small will always find a way," he replied. "That's on them, not you." Those words landed like a soft hand on an old bruise, steady, knowing, impossible to ignore. For a moment, Mara couldn't speak. The station felt strangely sacred in its emptiness, like a place where two strangers could be honest for the first time in years. She glanced toward the tracks, needing something solid to look at. "I'm not usually like this." "I believe you," Evan said, the corner of his mouth softening. "And you don't have to explain yourself to me." The fact that he wasn't demanding anything, no details, no backstory, no apology, made her chest ache in a way that felt both painful and relieving. "That was a lot for you to step into," she said quietly. "It wasn't hard," he answered. "You just looked tired of being hurt." The words hung between them. She wasn't sure how he saw it, how anyone could see years of erosion in a single moment, but he had. And that frightened her, almost as much as it comforted her. The digital sign clicked, announcing another train arriving in 8 minutes. Mara shifted her weight. She didn't want him to feel obligated to stay. "You don't have to wait with me anymore," she said softly. "I know," he replied, but didn't move. "I'll stay until you're steady." The gentleness of that, unforced, unassuming, was something she hadn't known in a long time. She let out a breath that trembled on the way out. "You're very kind." "I'm not always," he said, "but tonight wasn't hard to figure out." Mara looked at him then, really looked. Lines at the corners of his eyes hinted at a life lived with effort. The silver at his temples carried stories she wasn't privy to. He wasn't polished the way Daniel had been, he was something else. Solid, collected, present. A distant train horn echoed through the station. Mara straightened, easing her grip on her bag. "I should go home," she whispered. He nodded. "Of course." They walked toward the platform doors together, each step slow, as if neither wanted to break the fragile calm that had settled. She hesitated about halfway. "I never got your last name." He gave a faint smile. "It's all right. Evan is enough." Something about that answer, simple, self-contained, made her want to ask more. But she didn't. She wasn't ready for curiosity to outweigh caution. "Thank you," she said again, unsure how else to convey the weight of what he'd done for her. "You're welcome, Mara." Her name sounded different when he said it, grounded, not mocked. The arriving train screeched in, wind rushing across the platform as the cars slowed. Mara took a small step backward before forcing herself forward again. "Good night, Evan." "Good night," he said. "Get home safe." She boarded quickly, found a window seat, and pressed her palm against the cool glass. As the train pulled away, she caught one last glimpse of him, standing beneath the flickering lights, hands in his pockets, watching until the cars disappeared into the dark. Even after he vanished, the echo of his voice lingered in her mind, steady, certain, undeserved. Why did his presence feel like something she'd been missing without realizing it? And why, as the miles passed beneath the wheels, did she wish she had asked him to stay just a little longer? Mara's phone buzzed before sunrise, 47 notifications she couldn't make sense of. The sound was sharp in the quiet of her small apartment, cutting through the soft hum of the old radiator. She pushed herself up, blinking against the pale light sneaking through the blinds. Her thumb hesitated over the screen. No one texted her this early. When the screen lit, her pulse stumbled. "Have you seen this? Call me as soon as possible. Please tell me you're okay." A link appeared again and again, from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Her brow furrowed as she tapped it. The video began instantly. There she was, standing frozen on the station platform, Daniel's voice dripping with the same cruelty that had once filled her home. And then Evan stepped into frame, calm and steady, placing his hand on her back. The camera caught everything. Daniel's stunned expression, the shift of power, the way she leaned toward a stranger just to survive the moment. Her stomach clenched. She shut off the sound, but the images kept playing, framed by comments scrolling beneath it. Poor woman. Who is that guy? She looks terrified. Isn't that Evan Ward? She's faking it for attention. Mara's breath hitched. She didn't know who Evan Ward was. She only knew his first name. She dropped the phone onto the blanket, suddenly cold despite the warm room. Her mind raced. She replayed the night before, the quiet platform, his steady voice, the way he had watched the train pull away. It had felt like a small, private moment. Now it was everywhere. Her phone rang. She flinched. The caller ID made her chest tighten. Caroline, Director of Literacy Programs. She swallowed and answered. Good morning. Mara, Caroline said, skipping any greeting. Of course they did. She closed her eyes. You saw the video. Everyone saw the video, Caroline replied. The board is already calling. Some donors are concerned about the attention. They're asking about your relationship with the man in the footage. There isn't one, Mara whispered. I don't even know him. People don't believe that, Caroline said gently. He clearly knew how to handle the situation. They think it wasn't a coincidence. Mara pressed her fingers against her forehead. The literacy program she ran depended on fragile, easily shaken funding. Any hint of scandal, even imagined, could destroy everything she had built. I didn't stage anything, she said, her voice cracking. I believe you, Caroline said, but her tone wavered. I need you to be careful today. If reporters call, do not engage. And please, don't post anything online. I won't, Mara said quickly. A pause stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. But calm was impossible. After the call ended, the apartment felt smaller than ever. Her hands shook as she picked up her phone again. Someone had written a name in the comments, Evan Ward. With a sinking feeling, she typed it into the search bar. The results loaded in seconds, and her world tilted. Photos appeared. Evan, in a navy suit at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, standing beside state officials, shaking hands with developers twice his age. Articles described him as the CEO of Ward Urban Renewal, a massive company involved in housing revitalization projects across the Northeast, known for reshaping entire neighborhoods and funding community centers. Her eyes widened. He wasn't just wealthy, he was everywhere. A man whose handshake carried political weight had stepped into her nightmare last night. And now the entire internet thought she knew him. Her chest tightened. Oh God. She scrolled further magazine covers, interviews he refused to give, articles about his privacy. Apparently, he avoided public attention, rarely appeared in social circles, and preferred to let his work speak for him. Yet, here he was, trending because of her. She pressed her palms to her eyes, fighting the burn. Had she ruined something for him? For herself? Her phone buzzed again. A text from a coworker this time. Are you okay? Reporters came by the office. She dropped the phone, as if it burned her. The sun had barely risen, and already her life was spiraling. She paced to the small kitchen, poured water without drinking it, then leaned on the counter to steady her breathing. Everyone had an opinion about her now. People dissected her clothes, her expression, her fear. They speculated about her personal life, her past, her relationship status. She felt stripped bare by thousands of strangers. Her phone buzzed again, another message from an unknown number. Why pretend to be a victim? She deleted it instantly, her throat tightening. She had survived years of Daniel's private cruelty. She wasn't sure she could survive being picked apart by the public. A knock at her door startled her so hard she nearly dropped her glass. No one visited her unannounced. Her legs felt weak as she moved toward the entrance, peering through the peephole. Her breath caught. It was Daniel's fiancée. Her polished hair, flawless makeup, expensive coat, everything about her looked deliberate and sharp. She stood with one hand on her hip, her expression unreadable. Mara's stomach twisted. She'd expected Daniel to react. She hadn't expected this. Her hand froze on the doorknob. Should she open it? Should she hide? Before she could decide, her phone vibrated in her other hand. A new text. From a number she didn't recognize. A short, steady message. "It's Evan. Don't open the door until we talk." Her pulse stumbled. How did he know? Why was he here? Why did he sound so certain? And what, exactly, was waiting for her on the other side of that door? When Mara opened her door, the last man she expected to see was standing in the hallway, hands in his pockets, like he'd practiced how to apologize. The morning light from the narrow window at the end of the hall stretched a pale glow behind him, outlining the shape of a man who did not belong in a place with peeling paint and humming fluorescent lights. Evan Ward stood there, as if he'd always known where to find her. For a moment, her breath caught. She still held her phone in one hand, the unanswered text glowing on the screen. She hadn't meant to open the door. Instinct had moved faster than thought. He spoke first, his voice low. "I wasn't sure you'd let me in." She stepped aside, not trusting her voice. Her apartment suddenly felt smaller, almost childlike, compared to the man now walking into it. He paused just inside the door, gaze moving slowly across the books stacked on the kitchen counter, the coat draped over a chair, the single lamp still lit from the long night. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for all of this." She tightened her grip on her phone. "You didn't do anything wrong." Evan shook his head slightly. "My stepping in, it put you in the spotlight. I didn't expect the video to spread. But that doesn't change the fact that you're the one paying the price." She turned away, her throat tightening. He watched her for a moment before closing the door gently behind him. "I'd like to talk about that." Mara exhaled slowly, bracing herself. "What did you mean when you texted me not to open the door?" A shadow crossed his expression. "Daniel's fiancée is here." Her pulse kicked. "How do you know?" "Because Daniel's been busy," he answered, slipping his hands out of his pockets. "He's spreading a version of the story where you manipulated the situation to trap a wealthy man." The words struck like a physical blow. Mara turned toward the kitchen counter, needing something to steady herself against. "He said that?" "Not said," Evan replied. "Repeated. To people who know me. To people who don't. To anyone who might listen." Mara's stomach twisted. "Why? Why would he even—" "Because you embarrassed him," Evan said gently. "You walked away with your dignity intact, and he couldn't stand it." Mara closed her eyes. It felt familiar, this twisting of truth, this rewriting of events until she barely recognized her own life. Daniel had done it before, in their marriage, in their divorce, now again, but louder. "I can't outrun this," she whispered. "Not when he's telling the story first." "That's why I'm here," Evan said. She turned. He stood with the calm steadiness he had shown on the platform, but there was something else now. Resolve. Concern, even. The kind that came from someone who had already made up his mind. He took a step toward her. "We need to redirect the narrative. Together." Mara stiffened. "Together how?" "I barely know you." "You don't have to know me," he said. "Not yet. But what's happening to you now? You shouldn't fight someone like him alone." Her breath trembled. He sounded so certain, too certain, and certainty from anyone, especially a powerful man, set off every quiet alarm she'd learned to listen to over the years. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "A temporary partnership," he said. "A united front. Publicly." Her pulse skipped. "Meaning what?" He let a few seconds pass before answering. "We let people assume there's something between us. We appear together a few times. Calm, composed, steady. We show respect, stability. It makes Daniel's story collapse under its own weight." Mara stared at him. The idea felt impossible, dangerous. She shook her head. "I can't pretend to be connected to you. You're—" She struggled for the right word. Too different? He offered gently. Too visible, she whispered. Everything you touch becomes public. I work in community literacy, Evan. I'm nobody. People like me don't do this. He leaned on the back of the chair nearest him, his posture relaxed but his expression unwavering. That modesty is part of the problem. You think standing beside me would make you look small. It wouldn't. She swallowed hard. My job, my programs, they're on the line. I can't risk making the wrong move. That's exactly why you shouldn't let him control what happens next, he said. Mara looked down at her hands. They were shaking again, just like they had last night on the platform. What if people think I'm using you? She whispered. He held her gaze, steady as stone. Her throat tightened. Why would you help me like this? Evan hesitated just enough for her to sense something unspoken behind his eyes. Because I've been on the receiving end of people twisting my life for their gain. Because I know what it feels like to be cornered by someone who once knew all your weaknesses. He stepped closer, voice warm and grounded. And because when you asked me for help last night, you didn't ask for anything more than a moment of dignity. That told me everything I needed to know. Something in her softened, just barely, but fear still pulsed beneath it. This could ruin things for you too, she murmured. Let me worry about that, he said. The hallway outside went quiet. Even the radiator seemed to pause, as though waiting for her answer. Mara looked at the man standing in her tiny apartment, the billionaire who had stepped into a stranger's pain without blinking, and something inside her shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest thread of possibility. She drew a slow breath. Evan, if I agree to this, what happens next? He held her gaze as if the question mattered more than anything. That, he said quietly, depends on how much you're willing to let me stand beside you. The words hung in the air, trembling between fear and something dangerously close to hope. The restaurant's soft lighting made Mara feel like she'd walked into someone else's life. Warm amber glowed from crystal fixtures, casting reflections across polished tables and tall windows that overlooked a quiet street in downtown Hartford. People here spoke in low voices, the kind that carried confidence born from comfort and money. Mara hesitated at the entrance. Smoothing the fabric of the dress Evan had insisted on. It wasn't extravagant, just simple, elegant, far nicer than anything she would have chosen for herself. Still, it felt like wearing borrowed courage. Evan rose from a corner table the moment he spotted her. He looked different tonight, no winter coat hiding his shoulders, no rushing crowd around him. Just a man who seemed too composed for the chaos she'd been living in. You made it, he said, warmth softening his voice. She nodded, trying to ignore how her heartbeat quickened. I almost turned back twice. I'm glad you didn't. He pulled out her chair, a gesture so natural it left her momentarily still. She couldn't remember the last time a man had done that for her without expecting something in return. The moment she sat, she felt the room shift. Not loudly, just glances, whispers. Small acknowledgments from patrons who recognized Evan Ward and the woman sitting with him. Her shoulders tightened. Everyone's looking. They look at me, he said calmly. Not at you. That's not comforting, she murmured. He smiled, brief but grounding. Then let me try again. None of them matter. She wasn't sure if she believed that. People with influence always mattered. People like Evan lived in a world where a single rumor could ripple into headlines. She was the unpredictable variable he'd chosen to stand beside. She tried to focus on the menu, pretending to read the dishes. But the numbers blurred. Her hand trembled faintly beneath the table. Evan noticed. He leaned slightly closer. Order whatever feels familiar. Or let me choose for us. She let out a breath. I just don't want to look like I don't belong here. His voice gentled. Mara, you do belong here. Not because of me. Because you're exactly who you are. Her throat tightened at that, a strange ache pressing behind her ribs. She wasn't used to being spoken to like she was enough. Their food arrived, but she ate slowly, each bite edged with nerves. It was all too much, too visible, too elegant, too unlike her world of library shelves, and donated books and coffee in chipped mugs. Halfway through the meal, everything shifted. The door opened. She didn't have to turn. She felt the familiar cold ripple down her spine before she even saw him. Daniel. She looked up just as he spotted them. His face changed in an instant, surprise, then calculation, then something darker. He leaned toward his companion, saying something she couldn't hear. The woman frowned but followed him anyway as he walked toward their table. Mara's stomach fluttered with dread. "He's here," she whispered. Evan didn't turn. He didn't tense. He simply placed his hand flat on the table, a quiet signal that she wasn't facing this alone. Daniel stopped beside them with a smile so sweet it almost glistened. "Well?" he drawled. "This is unexpected." Evan finally looked up, calm and polite. "Good evening." Daniel's eyes slid to Mara. "You clean up well. Didn't know you had this side to you." Her cheeks burned. Evan's expression didn't change, but his voice did. It cooled. Daniel raised his brows. "So, it's true. All those rumors online weren't exaggerating." Mara opened her mouth, but Evan spoke first. "There's nothing exaggerated about respecting someone." Daniel's smile twitched. "Right. Respect." He turned slightly toward Mara. "Is that what this is? Respect? Or is this your strategy?" Mara felt the room tilt. She hated this public cornering, this old familiar cruelty dressed in charm. Evan's hand brushed hers under the table, a barely there touch, grounding. "You should leave," he said quietly. Daniel laughed. "So you're protecting her now?" "From what, exactly?" "From you," Evan said. The words landed like a stone dropped in still water, soft, steady, impossible to ignore. Daniel's face reddened, the mask cracking faster than Mara had ever seen. "You don't know anything about us." Evan shook his head. "I know enough to recognize a man who can't stand losing control." A few nearby diners pretended not to eavesdrop. Mara's pulse thudded painfully. Daniel leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough. "Careful, Ward. Women like her." He didn't finish. Evan stood, not abruptly, not with heat. "That's enough," Evan said. "Go back to your evening." Something in Daniel's expression, anger, embarrassment, envy, flickered and collapsed. He turned sharply, storming toward the exit with his companion trailing behind. When the restaurant door closed, Mara felt her breath release in a shudder. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "He shouldn't have." "Don't apologize for his behavior," Evan said. "You're not responsible for what he chooses to be." Her eyes stung unexpectedly. It had been years since anyone had stood up for her without hesitation. She lowered her gaze to her hands, resting on the linen tablecloth. "I don't understand why you're doing all of this." "I told you," he said softly. "You shouldn't fight someone like him alone." She swallowed, unable to meet his eyes. Something warm unfurled inside her, too early, too fragile, too dangerous. Was this still an arrangement? Or was something shifting beneath the surface, changing shape, before either of them had found the courage to say it? Their meals grew cold as they talked not about rumors, not about Daniel, not about the strangers online dissecting their lives, but about the quiet years that had shaped them. The restaurant around them had softened into background noise. Glasses clinked distantly. A server passed by now and then, but no one interrupted. It felt like the world had shrunk to the small circle of warm light around their table. Mara cupped the porcelain teacup between both hands, letting the heat steady her. "I don't know how this all turned into whatever it is now," she murmured. "I wanted one moment of dignity. That's all." Even saying the words felt like peeling back a layer she'd kept tightly sealed. Evan nodded, not pushing, not filling the silence. "Sometimes," he said softly, "one moment is all it takes to show you what you've been carrying alone." She looked down at the tea. "My marriage. It didn't fall apart all at once. It was slow. A comment here, a criticism there, a question about whether I was aiming high enough. I didn't realize how much I shrank until I didn't recognize the sound of my own voice anymore." Evan's expression didn't change, but his gaze warmed in a way that made her feel seen without being exposed. She exhaled, surprised at how easily the truth came. "I used to love my work," she continued. "I loved helping people learn to read. Watching adults sound out words for the first time, watching kids discover stories, it felt meaningful. But Daniel," her throat tightened, "he made it seem small. Like everything I cared about wasn't enough." She didn't cry. Not here. But her voice wavered at the edge. Evan didn't offer pity. He simply shifted closer, resting his forearms on the table. She nodded, the truth settling heavily. "And you?" she asked, needing to pull the attention away from herself. "You said once that you understood betrayal." He didn't answer immediately, and for a moment she wondered if she'd pushed too far. But then he exhaled slowly, like someone opening a door that had long been locked. "I was engaged," he said. 6 years ago. Her name was Claire." Mara held still, sensing the weight of the moment. She was brilliant, ambitious, charming. Everyone said we were perfect for each other. But she wasn't with me. She was with my world, what it could offer her. A silence settled between them. "How did you find out?" Mara asked softly. "She slipped," he said. "A message she meant to delete. Not an affair, something colder. She'd been meeting with a competitor, feeding them information about my upcoming developments. When I confronted her, she told me she never loved me. That I was a strategic decision gone wrong." Mara's breath stilled. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head once. "I'm not telling you for sympathy, only because you shared your truth." Fair. The word hit with a quiet tenderness she hadn't expected. She watched his hands, the way he folded them on the table, strong, steady, with a hint of tension he couldn't quite hide. It struck her suddenly that for all his composure, for all his success, he carried hurts just as old and just as deep as hers. "I think," Mara said quietly, "that we both learned to live smaller after being hurt." Evan's eyes met hers. "Maybe we learned to live quieter," he said. "But not smaller. You're still here. Still working. Still caring. That isn't small." She blinked, surprised at the warmth rising in her chest. "Then what do you call it?" He leaned in, voice gentle but certain. "I call it strength." The words settled into her like a soft shock, warm, unexpected, dangerously close to healing something she didn't realize was still broken. She looked away, trying to catch her breath. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her without judgment baked into the tone. Years since she had felt like more than an inconvenience. The restaurant around them fell further into softness. A couple at a nearby table laughed quietly. The hum of conversation blurred into a low, comforting murmur. Her tea had gone lukewarm, but she held it anyway, a small anchor. "I don't know why this feels." She paused, searching for a word she could trust. "Different." Evan studied her for a moment, his gaze steady but not intrusive. "Because neither of us is pretending right now." Her heartbeat stuttered. She looked up slowly. "Are you?" "No," he said simply. "Not with you." The vulnerability of that admission made something inside her tremble. And she wasn't sure if it was fear or hope, maybe both. She found herself tracing the rim of her cup, trying to ground the feeling. "We said this arrangement was temporary." "We did," he agreed. "So why does this feel?" Her voice faded, unable to finish the thought. He didn't rush her. Didn't rescue her from the silence. He simply watched, as if waiting for a truth she hadn't dared name yet. Her fingers tightened around the cup. She wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet, but the question lingered between them, warm and unsettling. Why did this feel more intimate than anything either of them had expected? Mara stared at the forged documents, sickened by how real they looked. They lay across her small kitchen table, the same table where she'd once written lesson plans for adults learning their first English words. Where she'd marked reading milestones for children who held books like sacred objects. Now the surface was covered with lies dressed as truth. Signatures that weren't hers. Accusations that turned her life into something unrecognizable. Her hands trembled as she lifted one page. "He really did this," she whispered. "He really went this far." Evan stood beside her, close enough for his presence to steady her, but not so close that he pushed her. The quiet of her apartment pressed in from every corner, no sound but the hum of the refrigerator and her sharp, uneven breaths. "That signature looks exactly like mine," she said, voice cracking. Evan nodded once, jaw tightening. These weren't made by an amateur. She sank into the nearest chair, the shock turning her limbs heavy. Why would he do this? Her phone vibrated. Then again. She didn't want to look, but the screen kept lighting up, each notification a blow waiting to land. "Mara," Evan said softly, "you don't have to," but she already reached for it, as if bracing for impact. The messages were from parents she knew well, people she'd worked with for years, people she'd watched fight through job loss, night shifts, lack of childcare, and still show up for their children's reading sessions. "Is this true? We need to talk immediately. I don't feel safe sending my daughter until this is resolved. I trusted you." The last one cut deepest. Her throat tightened. "This is my entire life, Evan," she whispered, clutching the phone. "I don't have anything else. If I lose the program?" He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, leaning forward so their eyes met. A bitter sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. He held her gaze, steady. "Maybe not, but I can find the truth. And I already started." Before she could reply, he opened the folder he'd brought. He slid a single sheet toward her printed emails, a chain of transactions, a name circled in red. "What's this?" "The person who fabricated the documents," Evan said. He used a burner laptop, but he messed up once logged into a personal email before switching to the fake account. Mara's pulse quickened. "Who is he?" "A small-time private investigator in New Haven," Evan answered. "Someone who takes cash for quiet jobs." She swallowed, forcing out the question. "So, who hired him?" Evan hesitated. Not because he didn't know, because he needed her to be ready. Finally, he said, "Daniel." The room seemed to tilt. The headline she dreaded wrote itself inside her mind. "Disgraced literacy coordinator caught falsifying documents." The kind of scandal that erased careers, erased reputations, erased people. She covered her face with both hands. "I can't, Evan. I can't fight this. This isn't just gossip anymore. This is criminal." "That's why we brought in attorneys," he said quietly. "Mine are already working with investigators." She looked up sharply. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No," he agreed. "But you needed it." She shook her head. "This will cost you so much time, energy, attention. Why are you investing in this? In me?" His voice softened. "Because you're not doing anything wrong. And because you don't deserve to have your life burned down by someone who can't stand seeing you move on." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. Evan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he covered her shaking hand with his. "We'll expose this," he said. "Piece by piece. We'll prove he paid for those documents." "And my program?" she whispered. "What if the board believes him? What if the parents don't come back?" "We're not letting it get that far." "We?" she repeated quietly. "Yes," he said. For a moment she let herself lean into the strength in his voice. But fear rose almost immediately, sharp and cold. "What if he isn't done?" she murmured. "If he created these, what else is he planning? What if he ruins me beyond repair? What if he ruins you too?" Evan didn't answer right away. His silence wasn't fear. It was calculation, steady, controlled. But she only saw the surface, only felt the careful calm he offered her. Her voice shrank to a whisper. "How far is he willing to go?" Evan squeezed her hand once, firm and grounding, but he didn't say the word she wanted. He couldn't, not yet, because neither of them truly knew. And that uncertainty, that widening threat, settled in the room like a cold shadow creeping along the walls, leaving Mara with a question she couldn't chase away. What if Daniel hadn't even begun? The mansion glowed with warm lights, but Mara felt the weight of every pair of eyes as she entered. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, scattering soft gold across polished floors, and the tall glass doors that opened into a garden dotted with white lanterns. Servers in black moved quietly between guests, balancing trays of wine and canapés. Evan walked beside her, offering a small nod, as if to say, "You're not alone." Still, she clutched her clutch a little tighter. This wasn't her world. Not even close. Everything here spoke of legacy and wealth and generations who had never worried about paying rent or choosing which bill to ignore each month. She felt like someone had lifted her from her modest apartment and set her inside a photograph meant for another life. Guests greeted Evan with familiarity handshakes, warm smiles, comments about projects and investments. Then they glanced at her, their expressions politely curious, as though trying to fit her into a narrative they didn't yet understand. She forced a small smile, hoping it reached her eyes. When the head of the Literacy Foundation spotted her, he beamed and guided them toward the front of the room. "Mara Collins," he said with pride, "is the reason our Hartford program has flourished. Her work changed lives." Applause rippled across the space. Her cheeks warmed. She hadn't expected this. It felt like stepping into light she wasn't sure she deserved. Evan leaned slightly toward her. She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could. A microphone appeared in her hand before she had time to decline it. The foundation director gestured encouragingly. Just a few words. She froze. Public speaking had never frightened her, but tonight her throat felt lined with glass. The forged documents, the parents' messages, the humiliation online, they pulsed in the back of her mind like old bruises reopening. But then she caught sight of Evan. He didn't mouth instructions or pressure her. He only held her gaze with a quiet steadiness that told her she wasn't standing there alone. So she drew a slow breath. "I teach reading," she began, voice wavering for a heartbeat. "To adults who felt invisible. To children who've never owned a book. To people who believe learning stopped being possible for them long ago." The room softened. Guests leaned in. "And every time someone reads their first full sentence, I get to watch something change in their eyes. Hope doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it whispers." Her voice steadied. "I joined the program because stories saved me growing up, and I stayed because everyone deserves to know they matter." She paused, lowering the mic slowly. Hearts could be quiet things, but sometimes they beat loud enough to fill a room. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was warm, genuine. When she stepped down, her breath trembled with a mixture of disbelief and something close to pride. Evan met her halfway, his expression full of something she couldn't name. "You were extraordinary." She shook her head lightly. "I was just honest. That's what made it extraordinary." She looked away, afraid the softness in his eyes might undo her. But that softness vanished abruptly, a flicker she caught only because she'd been watching him. His attention had shifted to the far end of the ballroom. Mara followed his gaze. "Daniel?" He stood at the bar, leaning too heavily on the counter, a drink clutched in one hand. His tie hung crooked, his cheeks flushed, his expression sharp with something dangerous. A cold knot formed in her stomach. He spotted them a moment later. His smile twisted, not friendly, not controlled, just mean. He pushed off the bar and strode toward them with uneven steps. "Mara," he called, his voice too loud. Evan stepped half a pace closer to her. Daniel stopped in front of them, looking her up and down with drunken disdain. "Didn't expect to find you here," he slurred. "Playing dress-up in someone else's world?" Her breath stilled. "Walk away, Daniel," Evan said quietly. Daniel laughed. "Oh, I'm not talking to you yet. I'm talking to her." He jabbed a finger toward Mara. "You think standing next to him makes you someone?" The room seemed to dim. Mara felt herself shrinking, the old instinct to become small clawing up her spine. Evan stepped forward. "Enough," but Daniel ignored him. "Tell me, Mara, what's the plan? Marry rich this time? Climb your way into the kind of life you were never meant to have?" Her face burned. Guests watched openly now, whispers rising. "Daniel," Evan said, voice low and steady, "you need to leave." For a second, Daniel simply swayed. Then his gaze sharpened, dark, focused, malicious. He grabbed Evan's arm and yanked him several steps away from the crowd. Mara's breath hitched. She stayed rooted, unable to move, unable to hear more than fragments of their hushed argument. But she saw Daniel's face twist, saw Evan's jaw tighten, saw Daniel lean in, lips curling as he hissed something venomous. Something meant to wound. Whatever he said made Evan's posture shift, not with fear, but with the restraint of someone fighting the impulse to hit back. Daniel smirked, triumphant. Evan said something sharply in return, and Daniel's smile vanished. The tension between them crackled like wires about to spark. Then Daniel turned abruptly and stalked out, leaving the ballroom humming with discomfort. Evan remained where he was, shoulders rigid, the weight of what had been said still hanging on him. He didn't return to her immediately. He stayed still, breathing slowly as if steadying himself. Mara felt her chest constrict. What had Daniel threatened? What line had he crossed this time? And what would Evan choose now, protect her, or protect his own carefully built world? She wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Cold night air hit them as the terrace door shut Daniel's fury barely contained. The music from the gala thumped faintly behind them, muted by thick glass, leaving only the winter wind sweeping across the stone balcony and the strained breathing of three people whose lives had collided too many times. Daniel spun toward Evan first, shoulders tense, jaw clenched. "What did you tell her?" he demanded. "What lies did you feed her about me?" Evan didn't rise to the anger. He simply pulled a folded document from inside his jacket and held it out. "These aren't lies." Daniel's expression flickered just a millisecond of panic before he covered it with a scoff. "You think I'm scared of a few papers?" "You should be," Evan said. "It's proof you paid someone to forge allegations against her." Mara stood near the doorway, hands trembling inside her shawl, but she forced herself not to retreat. She listened, really listened, as Evan spoke with the calm certainty of a man who had already made peace with the consequences. "We followed the trail," he continued. "Bank statements, emails, a burner laptop that wasn't wiped clean enough. He works for you, Daniel. And he did exactly what you told him to do." Daniel stepped closer, face tightening. Evan's voice didn't rise. "Everything is already in the hands of investigators." Daniel froze, not in fear, but in anger sharpened to a fine edge. He shot a look toward Mara. "Of course," he said, voice twisting. "You get a rich man on your side, and suddenly you're a saint? You think he actually cares what happens to you?" Mara flinched, but Evan didn't. "What I think," Evan said, "is that you're terrified of losing control over her." "She needed me," Daniel snapped. "She depended on me." "No," Evan replied. "She survived you." That landed like a blow. Daniel's face reddened, his breath coming faster. He turned away from Evan and closed in on Mara instead. "That's the thing about you," he hissed. Mara's fingers curled into her shawl. Her old instincts rose the urge to stay still, to shrink, to weather the storm until it passed. But something different moved inside her, this time a small, steady pulse of anger that had nowhere left to hide. Daniel kept talking, each word dragging up years of quiet wounds. "He doesn't see you clearly yet," he said. "But he will. You're going to ruin his life, too. It's what you do." Evan took a step forward. "Stop talking to her like that." But Mara lifted a hand to stop him. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Look at me." He did. Surprised by the steadiness in her tone, she took one breath, then another, forcing her shoulders to stay squared. "You don't get to decide who I am anymore." His brows furrowed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said. "You don't define me, you don't speak for me, and you don't get to rewrite my story because you can't stand how small you feel when you're not in control." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Years of swallowed words rose in her chest, gathering strength. "You treated me like I was fragile, but I wasn't," she said. "You made me doubt myself so I wouldn't notice how much of yourself you were losing. I'm done apologizing for being someone you couldn't break." The wind gusted across the terrace, whipping her hair across her cheek. But she didn't waver. Daniel stepped back a half-inch, something unsteady flickering in his expression. Mara shook her head. "I think I'm strong because I walked away from you." That hit him harder than anything Evan had said. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant music from inside. Daniel pointed a shaky finger at her. "This isn't over," he whispered. "It is," she said. "You just don't know it yet." He looked between them, her steady gaze, Evan's quiet readiness, as if searching for a foothold in a world that had finally stopped bending for him. Then he pushed past them and stormed inside, nearly knocking over a server as he disappeared into the crowd. Silence settled on the terrace. Mara exhaled slowly, a tremor running through her, not fear this time, but something like release. Her knees felt unsteady, but her voice had held. For the first time in years, she had stood in the cold and refused to shrink. Evan watched her carefully. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though the breath she drew was shaky. I think I finally said what needed to be said." "You did," he said softly. She looked at him, at the warmth in his eyes that hadn't dimmed despite everything. "Whatever he said to you earlier," she whispered. "I'm sorry." "You don't owe me an apology," Evan said. "He's the one who crossed every line." She looked back toward the glowing ballroom, where conversations resumed and music swelled, completely unaware that something had shifted out here under the cold sky. "Do you think people will believe the truth?" she asked quietly. Evan didn't answer right away. He stepped beside her, close enough that his warmth reached her through the chill. "The truth has a way of rising," he said. "Especially now that you've found your voice." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the world would see what Daniel had done. That the lies would unravel. That the program she'd built with her whole heart wouldn't be swallowed by someone else's vindictiveness. But hope and fear tangled inside her, leaving one question echoing louder than the rest. Would the world finally see the truth? By noon, every news site carried the same headline, this time in her favor. Mara read the words again and again, each pass loosening something tight in her chest. Exposé reveals pattern of manipulation by Daniel Pierce. Her name wasn't buried in the subtext anymore. It was free of accusation, free of suspicion, free from the narrative he had tried so hard to write over her life. The sunlight through her small living room window felt strangely warm, as if the day itself had been waiting to breathe with her. Still, the relief came tangled with exhaustion so deep it seemed to settle into her bones. She sat on the edge of her couch, elbows on her knees, letting the quiet settle around her. After weeks of turmoil, silence felt almost foreign. Her phone vibrated again, a steady stream of messages she could barely keep up with. Some came from friends she hadn't heard from in months. Others came from parents in her literacy program, people who had once looked at her with doubt and had every right to ask questions. But now their messages carried something different. "We're so sorry. We knew you wouldn't do those things. Thank you for standing up." Her throat tightened at the outpouring. She wasn't used to being defended. She'd learned to move quietly through conflict, to shrink in arguments, to avoid calling attention to herself. And now she was the center of a story she didn't choose. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. She opened the exposé again, scanning through the investigative details, testimonies from Daniel's past partners, records of previous smear attempts, and proof that the consultant he hired had been paid with funds drawn from questionable accounts. It was all there, laid bare. Mara didn't enjoy seeing it. The truth was ugly, and she felt the weight of every woman mentioned. She wasn't the only one. She had simply been the one who couldn't stay silent. Her phone rang. She startled at the sound, then saw the caller ID, Mrs. Halpern, her supervisor. She inhaled and steadied herself. "Hello?" "Mara," Mrs. Halpern said, breathless. "I wanted to call the moment I saw the article. I am so—" She paused, gathering herself. "I owe you an apology." Mara's fingers curled around the phone. "You were doing what you thought you had to do. That doesn't excuse it," her supervisor replied softly. I let pressure override my judgment, and I should have had more faith in you. They want to fund the next year of the program at full capacity. A warmth spilled through Mara's chest, unexpected and fragile. That's wonderful, she whispered. People believe in you. And they should. Her supervisor hesitated. Take the afternoon. Rest. You've carried too much alone. After the call ended, Mara set her phone down and leaned her head against the back of the couch. Rest. The word seemed both foreign and needed. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her breath slow. Another notification buzzed. She ignored it, then another, and another. Eventually, curiosity nudged her to look. A group message from the volunteers at the literacy center. A voicemail from the principal of the elementary school they partnered with. A text from a former student who had moved states away but still thought of her every year when she renewed her library card. And then one message stood out, simple and direct. Can I stop by for a few minutes? Her breath caught. Evan hadn't contacted her all morning. She knew he had meetings, attorneys, responsibilities in a world much larger than hers. She didn't expect him to check in after every development. But that didn't stop the small ache of wondering where he was in all this, what he felt, what he thought, whether he regretted stepping into the mess of her life. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She typed, yes, then deleted it. Typed, if you have time, deleted that too. Finally she settled on, you can. She set the phone aside before she could second-guess it. Her apartment looked the same as it had yesterday, small, warm, a little cluttered from the weeks she'd spent too drained to tidy. But today it felt different, like she could stand inside it without apology. A soft knock sounded 20 minutes later. Mara's heart raced as she opened the door. Evan stood there, holding a paper cup of peppermint tea, the one he'd learned she preferred in winter. His eyes searched hers, not with pity, but with a quiet recognition that made her chest tighten. You're all over the news, he said, voice gentle. So I've seen. They finally got it right. She let out a shaky laugh. Feels strange. I know. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind them. Vindication always feels different than you think it will. Thinner. Quieter. She nodded. That was exactly it. They moved to the small table near the window. His hands lingering for a moment on the cup. You did something hard, he said. You stood up. You kept going. That matters. Evan, she murmured, gripping the warm cup with both hands. You're the reason I had any chance of fighting back. He shook his head. No. You were the one who faced him. She had no words for a moment, only the soft thud of her pulse in her ears. Gratitude welled inside her, thick and heavy, almost too big to hold. And beneath it, something else. Something quieter, more complicated. She drew in a breath. Now that all of this is coming to an end, I don't know what happens next. Evan's eyes softened. Neither do I. But he didn't offer answers. He didn't push. He simply sat there, steady and present, letting the uncertainty breathe between them. Outside the window, snow flurries drifted lazily past the glass, catching the light like small, fluttering sparks. Mara wrapped her hands tighter around the cup. She had her name back. Her work, her community, her dignity. But one question lingered, pulling gently at the edges of her heart. What was she supposed to do about the man who had stood beside her through every moment of the storm? Evan's voice was quiet when he finally asked, Do you want this to end here? The words hung in the small living room like dust caught in a shaft of winter light. Mara felt them before she understood them, felt the tremor beneath his calm tone. She looked up from the untouched cup of tea on the table, her breath shallow. He hadn't stepped closer. He hadn't reached for her hand. He just stood there, as if giving her space was the only way to tell the truth without frightening it. She wasn't sure she could breathe. Outside, a car rolled down her street, its tires breaking through ice left from the storm. The sound grounded her in the present moment, her modest apartment with its chipped mug on the counter, its books stacked against the wall, its quiet that had once felt safe but now felt like a question. Evan, she said, her voice thinner than she meant. I don't know what you're asking. Yes, you do. His eyes softened, even as he held himself still. We said we'd pretend, just for a while. Her stomach tightened. She wanted to look away. Instead, she forced herself to meet his gaze, because turning from him felt like turning from something she had wanted before she dared admit she did. He took one step closer, just one. Easy. The word stung because nothing about him had been easy. Not the way he defended her without hesitation. Not the steady calm of his voice when everyone else doubted her. Not the way he looked at her like she was worth the trouble of fighting for. Worth the space she took up. She swallowed hard. Why now? Because the crisis is ending, he said. And what's left is real life. I don't want to assume I belong in yours. His honesty unraveled something inside her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself without thinking, as if she could hold her ribs still while her heart stumbled. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered at last. Tell me why, he said gently. Mara stared at her hands. Because I've been here before, not with you, not anything like you, but with hope. With trusting someone. And every time I did, I ended up smaller than when I started. He didn't argue. He didn't rush to reassure her. He waited, letting the words come in their own time. My marriage, she continued, quietly, didn't end in one moment. It died in 1,000 small cuts. Every criticism, every dismissal, every time he made me feel like what I wanted was too much or too little. I'm afraid I'll be that woman again. Afraid I'll miss the warning signs that I'm becoming invisible. Evan's expression tightened, not with defensiveness but with something like sorrow. I would never. I know, she said quickly. At least, I think I do. But I thought I knew before. I trusted someone who told me he cared, and he used that trust to tear pieces off me. Evan stepped closer, not touching her, but enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. Mara, he said softly. You are not the same woman you were then. I feel like I am. You're not. His voice didn't rise. If anything, it dropped steady, grounding. You faced down a man who tried to rewrite your entire life. You said no to him, even when he tried to make you break. You're standing right now in the aftermath of something that would have crushed most people. You don't see your strength, but I do. Her breath caught. The room felt smaller, warmer, impossibly intimate. But what if I can't do this? She asked. What if I don't know how to trust something good anymore? He swallowed, and for the first time, she saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Then we figure it out slowly. Carefully. No performances. No pretending. Just two people, trying to see where this goes. She felt a tremor move through her. And if I hurt you, then I'll deal with it, he said simply. Risk doesn't bother me. Risk doesn't bother me. And if you hurt me? This time, he didn't answer right away. He slipped his hands into his pockets, his shoulders drawing a little tighter, not in defensiveness, but in honesty. I can't promise I never will, he said. No one can. But I can promise I won't do it carelessly. Or out of pride. Or out of wanting control. I've been the one left before too. She blinked, surprised. He nodded. I'm scared too, Mara. The words were quiet, but they hit her harder than anything he'd said that night. Made him reel. Her throat tightened. Why are you scared? Because wanting someone is easy, he murmured. Needing someone, hoping for something real, after years of being careful, that's where it becomes dangerous. A single tear blurred her vision. She brushed it away quickly, embarrassed. He took a small step closer. Do you want this to end here? He repeated, softer this time. I won't hold it against you. I won't disappear, but I won't push either. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her heart beat hard against her ribs, not with panic, but with something unsteady and new, something that felt almost like the beginning of hope. She drew a shallow breath. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, he replied. So am I. The room went very quiet, the kind of quiet where a single choice could shift everything. Mara stared at the man standing in front of her, the man who had stepped into chaos without asking for anything. The man who looked at her like she was not broken but rebuilding. Could she risk this? Could she trust her heart with someone again? She didn't yet have the answer, but she knew the question wasn't going away. And that, somehow, was the most terrifying part. They stood beneath the street lamp as if the world had finally quieted around them. Snowmelt glistened on the pavement, reflecting the amber glow above them. The night felt softer than it had any right to be after the weeks they'd lived through. Even the breeze seemed to move cautiously, as if not to disturb what was unfolding. Mara pulled her coat tighter around her, but the chill wasn't what made her breath unsteady. It was the way Evan looked at her, steady, patient, almost reverent, as though he understood the fragile ground they were standing on. Neither of them rushed to speak. There was something sacred about the silence, a stillness that hadn't existed between them before. Mara drew a slow breath. I didn't expect tonight to feel like this. Like what? He asked quietly. Quiet, she said. Safe. A faint smile touched his lips, the kind that didn't demand anything. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. She knew he meant it. He always said things he meant. That was part of what terrified her, and part of what pulled her toward him in ways she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. For a moment, neither of them moved. The space between them was narrow enough for possibility, wide enough for fear. Mara felt her pulse along her throat, each beat asking a question she wasn't used to answering. Evan, she murmured, I don't know how to do this slowly. I don't know how to trust the good things. He didn't step closer. Instead, he offered his hand, not insisting, not coaxing, simply offering. Then we start here, he said, at a pace that feels real to both of us. Her fingers hovered above his palm before resting lightly in it. Even that small touch made something inside her uncoil. She swallowed against the sudden warmth rising in her chest. Is this okay? He asked. She nodded. Yes. More than okay. The street was empty except for the two of them. A single dog barked somewhere in the distance. The rest of the world stayed outside the circle of light where they stood. He lifted his free hand slowly, carefully, brushing a loose strand of hair back from her cheek. His fingertips were warm in the cold air. She didn't flinch this time. She let her breath settle. You're shaking, he whispered. I know. Do you want to stop? She shook her head. No, I just need a moment. Take all the time you need. It struck her then how gentle he was. How quietly he moved through the most fragile parts of her without pushing, without trying to shape her into someone easier or braver or less complicated. The kind of gentleness that came from knowing his own scars. She took one step closer. Just enough for her coat to brush his. His breath caught softly, not out of surprise, but out of recognition, a moment they both understood was inevitable, from the day they first met on that platform. Under the street lamp, she looked up at him. Evan, I'm choosing this. Not because I feel obligated, not because I'm overwhelmed. I'm choosing you because when everything was falling apart, you saw me. Not the headlines, not the story. Me. His jaw tightened, the quiet kind of emotion men like him rarely allowed anyone to see. And I'm choosing you, he said. Every version of you. The brave parts. The scared parts. The parts still healing. He leaned in, slow enough for her to pull back if she needed to. She didn't. Their first kiss wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't born of desperation or performance. It was soft, steady pressure, warm breath, a gentle meeting that felt like an exhale after years of holding herself together too tightly. She felt his hand steady at her jaw, felt her own shoulders drop for the first time in longer than she cared to admit. When they pulled back, she rested her forehead against his chest. I don't know what happens next, she whispered. That's okay, he said. We don't need a blueprint. Just honesty and patience. She nodded against him. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had softened, reshaped by the quiet certainty of his presence. Something tender spread through her, slow and tentative, like dawn pressing against the last edges of night. After a long pause, she stepped back, her hands still lightly holding his. The amber glow caught the sheen of melted snow in her hair. "Evan." She hesitated. "I'm not ready for big decisions, or declarations, but I am ready to stop pretending I don't feel something." His smile deepened, not triumphant, not smug, just relieved. "Then that's enough." A car passed at the far end of the street, its headlights sweeping across them briefly. Mara felt exposed for a moment, not in a way that frightened her, but in a way that made her realize how much she had hidden from herself. She let herself lean into his warmth again, just slightly, letting her cheek rest against his shoulder. No audience, no rumors, no headlines. Just the steady rise and fall of his breathing beside hers. Maybe choosing something real didn't require certainty. Maybe it only required permission to try again, to hope again, to let softness enter the places hardened by survival. She closed her eyes, allowing the moment to settle into her bones. What came next would be complicated, beautiful, risky, healing. But standing there, under the street lamp, her hands wrapped in his, she realized she wasn't afraid of the question anymore. She was ready to hear whatever answer her heart eventually gave. Sunlight poured through the windows of the Community Literacy Center, a place that didn't exist 6 months ago. The morning light stretched across the polished wood floors, warming the bright rugs and low shelves filled with picture books. Mara paused in the doorway, letting the scene settle in her chest. Children arranging crayons, volunteers chatting softly, a mother helping her son hang up his coat. It felt unreal, as if she had stepped into someone else's life. Someone steadier, someone whole. She adjusted a stack of donated books on the counter, her fingers lingering on the faded spines. Some were worn, pages softened by years of little hands. "They'll get a second life here," she whispered, almost to herself. Behind her, she heard footsteps measured, familiar. Evan leaned against the doorframe, his coat slung over one arm, watching her with a kind of quiet pride she still didn't know how to receive. "You built this," he said. She shook her head. "You helped." She kept her eyes on the books, embarrassed by how her voice wavered. He stepped closer, close enough that she felt the warmth from him even before she turned. "Mara, you were the one who kept going when everything tried to break you." She gave a soft laugh, barely more than breath. "I didn't do it alone." "No," he said gently, "but you led." A group of children ran past them toward the reading area, laughing. One little girl stopped abruptly when she saw Mara, handing her a paper crown made from construction paper. "We made these for the teachers." "For me?" Mara asked. The girl nodded vigorously. "You make reading feel safe." Mara froze. The words landed deep past the surface, past the old wounds, into the place that had ached the longest. She knelt to hug the girl, her throat tightening. "Thank you, sweetheart." As the child ran off, Mara rose, but couldn't quite steady her breath. Evan didn't touch her. He simply stayed close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. "It hits differently when the healing comes from kids," he said softly. She wiped quickly at her eyes, embarrassed by her tears but unable to stop them. "I used to think I wasn't built for this kind of goodness, or stability, or trust." She looked around the room, the bright corners, the shelves, the chairs waiting to be filled by parents who had believed in her. "Now I think I was just waiting for the right moment. And the right people." Evan's smile was small but full. "I'm glad you let me be one of them." A volunteer called her name, and she excused herself to greet a new family signing up. Evan watched her move across the room steady, warm, no longer shrinking herself to fit into the corners of her own life. The children gravitated toward her naturally. Parents listened to her with respect. She carried herself differently now, as though she had stepped fully into a version of herself that had been waiting for years. When the reading session began, she sat on the rug with a group of children gathered around her. Evan stayed near the back of the room, hands in his pockets, not wanting to intrude on the moment. But Mara glanced up, found him easily, and held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than she usually managed. She read with a softness that made the room feel warmer. Her voice lifted and fell with the story, the children leaning closer, trusting her through the rise and fall of each sentence. Evan felt something in his chest settle, a quiet certainty he hadn't known he'd been missing. After the session, the children spilled out toward the craft tables, and Mara approached him. "Thank you for being here. I wouldn't have been anywhere else." She hesitated. The sunlight caught the edge of her hair, turning it golden. "Evan, 6 months ago, everything felt broken. I didn't think I had anything left to offer anyone. Not even myself." "You were wrong," he said gently. She smiled at that soft, genuine, unguarded. "I know. Now." They walked through the center together, checking the reading lists, talking with volunteers, sharing small glances that carried more warmth than words ever could. Outside, spring was beginning to push through the last remnants of winter, buds forming on the trees lining the sidewalk, the air carrying traces of thawed earth. When they stepped out into the sunlight, Mara paused at the bottom of the steps. "I'm not the woman I was," she said. "I'm not her anymore." "Good," Evan said. "She deserved rest. You deserve something new." She looked at him then fully, openly, and for the first time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something she could help build, something she could claim. "What do you think comes next?" she asked quietly. He reached out his hand, not assuming, just offering. "Whatever we choose." Mara placed her hand in his, letting the warmth settle through her fingers, letting it anchor her. The past no longer felt like a chain. The future no longer felt like a cliff. It felt like open ground, soft, steady, hers to step into. Sunlight touched her shoulders as if blessing the beginning, and for the first time, she let herself wonder, truly wonder, what kind of life she could create now that she finally believed she deserved one. Sometimes, healing begins in the quietest places long after we've stopped believing it's possible. Not with grand gestures, not with perfection, but with the simple courage to take one more, small step toward ourselves. There's a gentle truth woven through Mara's journey. We don't heal when life finally stops hurting. We heal when we stop shrinking to survive it. When we let someone see the parts we kept hidden. When we allow kindness to land without questioning whether we deserve it. Another truth lingers beneath it all. The past can shape us, but it doesn't get to own us. Not when we choose people who listen instead of judge, who stay instead of retreat, who meet our fear with patience instead of pressure. Sometimes the right presence doesn't fix the broken pieces, it simply reminds us we're still worthy of being whole. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of becoming an adult. Learning that tenderness can be strength, that trust can be rebuilt, and that life can still open new doors, even after we've convinced ourselves they were locked forever. If your heart feels a little heavier or a little softer after this story, may that softness be a sign that something in you is ready to breathe again. Thank you for spending your time with this story. Your presence here, listening, feeling, reflecting means more than you know. If the journey touched you, even in a small way, a simple like, share, or subscribe helps carry these gentle stories to someone else who might need a moment of hope today. Wishing you warmth, steadier days, and a little more kindness than you expected.